For those watching this in the cinema, I imagine you're full of questions and your heart is full, um, and your spirit has been moved, and you're wondering about how endlessly surprising and hidden the world can be. Um, I want you to give yourselves a round of applause for having sat through this and considered so much. And also to give Milisuthando Bongela, a round of applause for taking on the task of trying to tell a story as vast and as nuanced and as deep as this. I have a bunch of questions. I have a number of questions, but permit me the space to embarrass you by quoting yourself back to you.
Ish,
Um,
no.
these are lines from this beautiful film. It starts with the privilege of being wanted. Pillars that look like ice cream swirls, so white, my sisters and I would often lick them. Um, they carried briefcases and worshipped beautiful words. Um, was it because I was inside apartheid's wish? Um, History is alive in the songs inside of our aunts. To gaze at them is to stare at ourselves. All of those are just 5 lines taken, which have whole worlds inside them. One could spend paragraphs unpacking. My first question to you is if you see yourself as a poet, if you are conscious of the spirit within you before you start writing, if you discovered this language as and the footage called it out from you from the recesses of your mind. Talk to me about the language and the evolving language in which you told the story.
Hmm. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm so happy that the first person I'm speaking to you is you, my dear friend Inua, who I respect so much as a writer and a poet and an artist and a peer in this work of being an artist. And to echo your words to say thank you for to the audience. You know, it takes a lot to sit through a film like this because it's the kind of um cinema that really asks you, it's not passive, it's not, let me sit back and be entertained. It really asks for your involvement, which I feel is the role of poetry and how poetry exists in the world. It's always language that asks more of us, that asks us to be participants and not to be passive people who are just receiving our recipients. And I didn't always know that I was a poet. I've always been a writer. I almost wrote unconsciously for the longest time. When I was very young, I got a diary for my birthday because I think I used to ask a lot of questions, and I was just a very curious child. And so my parents just knew that in order to let this one deal with herself, let her write. And so I didn't know that I was writing when I was writing. It was
Mm,
just one of the things that I did, activities that I did as a kid. When my sister used to play outside, she loved trees. I liked being in a bedroom with a pen or pencils, and all of my crayons knew all my secrets. All the
mm,
pencils knew everything, this interior world that I lived in. And so I didn't call myself a poet until the film was finished, actually, when I looked at the writing and said, oh, yes, this is indeed poetic. And the register of poetry was a very intentional choice because I studied journalism and I was trained in prose writing. And I tried to tell the story initially. The first couple of years were very prosy. It was very
mm,
fact-based, was very much me standing in front of buildings, pointing at them and saying in 1948, this happened in this building and this person was here. And whenever we try to execute any element of that story of this story in that way, it always felt incomplete. It always felt disingenuous. It always felt like I wasn't doing the thing that I know exists inside our bodies. History lives in very complex ways. Nothing is binary. Nothing is black and white. Nothing is simple in a human mind, in a human entity. And I was trying to approximate the way that these things feel in me, the way that history and psychology and spirituality and racism and time and the physical body live in my brain. So the
mm,
film is almost somebody cutting me open and seeing how racism is not separate from spirituality and religion and family and song and all of these things. And I think that the only way that we achieved that was to worship at the altar of poetry, which allows human beings to hold words can hold a lot more complexity when they are poetic. And poetry, as well as myths, as well as fables that we
Mm,
grew up with. History, because history is never reported by everybody that was at the scene, we never fully know what happened. And
mm,
so, especially as coming from a people who have an oral tradition, mine was to borrow from that oral tradition, which fuses facts that happened, but also there's mythology, there's poetry, there's song. And in so doing, you're able to have a more rounded, more fuller experience of what it means to have been in that moment. Because to only leave it to the people who are going to put it on text in a book is to
mm,
erase the way that the light fell or the way that someone's language or how something lived in a human body. And so I felt like poetry as a tool was very instrumental in how we were able to access memory and to also look at it as an unreliable source, but at the same time know that it's the only one that we have as it relates to things like the trans guy. And so it was at the end that I thought, oh, yes, I guess I am. And now I'm making a second film, and that poetic register is, I haven't tried to do the prose. I've just gone straight into the poetry again.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that is giving you a shorthand of communing with yourself, with your deeper self.
Mm.
Sort of, yeah. Um, I want to talk. You touched a lot, a little on music actually, and on song, and how integral it is to your cultural identity. Um, at the start, very start of the music of the film, there's this song that plays. It's almost lullaby-esque, but it sounds
Mhm.
slightly warped and disorientated. And I wondered if I imagine it was deliberate, but did you choose it specifically to evoke the sense of the film, which is also an attempt to reconstruct something that no longer exists? It felt like it complemented the subject matter of the film itself. Both things were sort of warped. You sort of questioning what you're hearing is what you're hearing, and what you're seeing is what you're seeing.
I wish I knew exactly which song you're talking about. There's
It's
music
just
throughout the
right up
film.
at the beginning, even when the credits are rolling, it's right at the very start. It sounds like a lullaby on piano, but it's sort of
Oh,
yeah.
it's a song by an Egyptian man named Omar Khorshed, and the
Mm.
song is called Awak. Um, and it's a song that I found one day online. There's a station that I used to listen to that I still do actually called Radio, and it's got like five O's, and it's this incredible app where you open it and you see the world map, and you're able to kind of zoom in and go to a country, and it'll tell you what music came from that country according to decades. So you can go Iran 1970s and you can hear all the music, or South Africa 1980s and hear all the music. And I found that song through that. And I'm actually still in the middle of licensing it. So we might need to cut this part out, actually,
Okay.
because yeah, there's a whole issue with that song. But the song itself, we wanted a gentle entry into the history. We wanted to give a sonic cue for how the audience is going to be engaging the story and history and themselves. A lot of the times with documentaries, especially documentaries about Africa, you are hit over the head with facts. You are hit over the heads with images and very gruesome images of very difficult histories, almost without care for you as an audience member of how are you going to feel when you leave the cinema.
Mm.
A lot of documentaries use this tactic of shock and wanting to shock you into action and wanting to enrage you into action, which is fine as a tactic. But we were very concerned with the fact that we're dealing with delicate species here called human beings. And people
Mm.
don't like to be told difficult things. They don't like to be told things that they don't agree with, especially us who know so much, especially us who are young and very active online, who know the discourse, who studied and read all the books. We are usually the ones that are in a position to educate or teach or tell somebody who might not know. And we are hardly in positions a lot of the times when we have to revisit some of these histories and look for the complexity. And so the music in the film is instrumental in that it assists the narrative unfolding. It assists especially the difficult parts where you have to confront aspects of history that are not violence with the gun. We were very intentional not to show not many images of Black people being, molested and abused and running away, which is what we were raised on a diet of those images, especially when it relates to apartheid. And so we were like, how do we point to violence? How do we point to psychological violence, especially by using the body? And so poetry was one tool, but music was the other, where the thing we kept saying in the edit suite was that we want to tell people difficult things, but make them feel like they are held. And
Mm,
so it's throughout the entire film that the music was the bedfellow of the writing and of course the images, which I think is we were also just like taking the rules of cinema and following them and
mm,
saying image, music can really reach people emotionally. And that was our main intention was to reach people emotionally and not necessarily intellectually only.
mm. I think you were
Yeah.
incredibly successful in that. There's this line you say, when over the footage of you discussing with your grandmother, who I take to be your grandmother, um,
Mm-hmm.
you say the ancestors extend themselves through you. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
working in the film, the conversations we're having quite a while ago, and I was aware of this spiritual journey you were taking. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
only when I watched the film that I realized the depths of that journey because it's just you feel it in the film. So I wondered if you could talk about how pivotal your spiritual relationship was in unlocking this story and perhaps the rights to tell this story and the need to tell.
Mm. Oh, thank you so much for this question. I would not be here today if it was not for my spirituality. There would be
Mm,
no film, there would be no poetry, there would be no person who is standing here able to talk if it wasn't for my privilege and this ability to have access to indigenous knowledge and indigenous forms of recalling memory, time, histories, as well as using these technologies that our people have used for thousands of years. And somehow meeting people, teachers and healers who helped me uncover some of these things in myself, and in the stories. And so and it was maybe 3, 4 years into making the film that I realized that it's not enough to just think about the intellectual or the psychological or the emotional or the material impacts of apartheid on us. I had to look at how did people survive apartheid, and spirituality was played a huge role in the way people contained themselves and contained their humanity. So while they were fighting against it, while they were toiling in and working in the mines and, surviving their dislocation and displacement, people would pray, they would gather, they would burn in Beppo, they would take their candles, they would meet at the river, they were practicing spirituality. And so that was a very important aspect to look at,
mm,
even in our post-apartheid considerations of our history. When I look at how they survived, I had to say, okay, how do I also protect myself and what protection do I need when I'm looking at this very difficult history? And some
mm,
of some of this archive was very, very hard to work with every single day. It literally made us sick, literally. We got skin rashes and um, we had a really, really bad reaction to looking at the very intentional plans of people trying to destroy you, where it wasn't a
mm,
mistake. Apartheid wasn't it was maybe, no, it was very direct, it was very intentional. And so when you're encountering this, and of course, when they were making these rules and these laws and implementing them, they never once dreamt that one day little Black girls would touch this stuff and look at it
mm,
and look at these people recording their own crimes, their own historical crimes. And so it was very difficult to watch that footage. And the thing we had to really guard against was how do we not re-traumatize the audience?
mm.
So how do we become the first respondents who it hurts us, right? But and we understand what it does so that by the time the audience is watching, not that we're censoring it, but we know what the audience is going to feel, and we cannot be irresponsible about it. When we got this footage, the people who gave it to us said this is a poison chalice. Propaganda is very, very easy to fall into its trap, where you do think, oh, life was like that. No, 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 it was all constructed. And so we were being taught how do we um look through with the third eye. And because our normal human eyes would sometimes get caught up and we would make cuts that were dangerous, that were falling right into the traps. And so we had to use the third eye. And so I worked with healers. I worked with
Mm,
a healer who is the National Poet Laureate of South Africa. And for the big philosophical questions, I would go to him and my team, me and my producer and my editor. We at some point had a consultation with him when we were completely stuck with the film. And he
wow.
said to us, no one is coming to save you. Nobody knows this film more than you. You guys have to ask the film. And so our relationship to the film was that this entity is not in me. It's not an ego thing where I'm like, oh, this is my idea. No, the film existed as a consciousness that chose to work with us. And so whenever we then started to edit, we had to come correct into the setting,
Mm,
into the edit suite. We couldn't just walk in after, a night of partying and coming in and not, we had to be cleansed. We had to eat certain things and we would light candles. Every single day we
mm,
edited this film, we lit a candle and that candle told us that we are dealing with a spiritual entity that wants to be in the world. And, other filmmakers in the world have also thought about cinema in this way as like a spiritual journey because you're actually inviting people into you're going into people's minds to and this is why cinema was used as the most successful propaganda tool because
yeah.
when you're seeing these images and you've never seen them you will actually think it's true. That's why that
Mm,
section in the film is called bewitchment because that is the power of images. And so we were like, if this thing bewitches, how do we protect ourselves from being bewitched, while trying to show people that look guys, even today propaganda is not finished. It's
mm,
there. It's around all the time. And what ritual do you have to do? And so I did a couple of rituals, protection rituals. I also spoke to the ancestors in the archive to
mm,
show me, to tell me about themselves, because there were some things that are hidden.
yeah.
And because some of these archives, no one was supposed to find them. And they belong to the apartheid Ministry of Information, like their propaganda unit. And so sometimes I would say, "What did you confess? What did you guys do?" And somehow I would find tapes in very strange places that are just actually it's just esoteric the way I found them. And
Wow.
so that was also kind of the understanding that a lot of the times, a lot of artists right now are working in this way. A lot of musicians, a lot of poets, a lot of people are understanding that art isn't just for commercial use. We're not just
Mhm,
doing this so we can have hits and we can have, be number one on Billboard. Yes, there's that lane and it's cool, but the role of art in the society, especially in African society, was always to be one of healing and one of making human beings understand the conditions we live in. Yeah.
yeah. I want to thank you for the duty of care um, you took on for yourselves and protecting yourselves and being deeply aware of the process so that you're able to be here having this conversation with me, but also the duty of care you assumed for us, your audiences, in how you put
Mm,
this together. As also a Black person who has been traumatized by the country I was born into in various ways, shape, or form, I deeply, deeply appreciate that. Um,
thank you.
I want to talk about something lighter, which is seeing the women of your family drinking tea from a saucer. I'd never really seen that before. And talk to me about that. Where did that come from? Where was that born from? Is it just
Oh my
specific
God, that is the
family or
most
across the
South
Transcaspian?
African thing. No, no, it's not my
Really?
family. It is, I thought it was an African thing. I'm surprised that in Nigeria that
No.
wasn't happening. Oh my God. That is the most South African thing. When the film premiered in South Africa, in Cape Town, at Encounters, so many people came to me and they said, also us, you remind me of my grandmother because that is how my grandmother used to drink tea. And I guess it's rural village women, even in townships. The
Mm,
elders, that is how tea is drunk. And even the queuing, even the idea of, you know, there's one person with a piece of meat and
mhm,
the kids are made to stand in the queue and all of you have a bite. It's an embodiment, it's an expression of Ubuntu, actually. It's an expression of this knowledge system and this value system that we are born and raised in as Black South Africans, which is essentially communalism, like we all are interconnected with each other, and that I don't exist as an individual. There's no such thing as an individual, actually. Like I don't give birth to myself. I don't feed myself when I'm small. Somebody has to feed me and somebody has to clothe me. And so fundamentally, we are all, we need each other. And so
mm,
in our culture, so many things are done to reinforce that in an invisible way. So when you go
mm,
to the shop, for instance, you don't go by yourself to the shop. You have to
yeah.
go with somebody that goes with you. So when you're eating as kids, we would all, as kids, when we went to the village, eat from the same bowl because it's unfathomable that each person has a plate. Not because there aren't enough plates, but the whole point is that we must all be together at all times. There is no such thing as, you know, a loneliness, the loneliness epidemic now. These people who created this knowledge system, they knew how dangerous it is to have lonely human beings. And so there was always these small ways in which it was reinforced in the culture that we must be together.
Yeah.
And that standing in the queue and drinking from the source of the grannies, that's their thing that they do.
Mm. I wanted to ask now about the songs that were sung to celebrate the trans guy. There's this beautiful part of the movie where your aunt is sat on a bed trying to recall what I think maybe was the national anthem or something. And she initially says, I need someone to sing with me. And she sort of stutters. Then someone enters in a purple dress. And as soon as she starts singing, they just launch into this song that had this really beautiful melody, but at the same time, it felt like, given what it was celebrating, it felt like it was a kind of brainwashing to me. Is that what you
Yeah.
felt from the about the songs?
I don't know what that song was. I don't think it was the national anthem, but it was one of the songs that was sung routinely in the Transkei
Mm,
because music and song especially is so instrumental to our identity as South Africans. It was also the tool that was used after apartheid. During apartheid, people were, at protests, people didn't just stand with boards. They would sing doi dois, and this goes all the way back to like the 18th century wars against the colonizers who came from Holland or the ones who came from the UK. This idea of singing as a way to engage your enemy it's part of the tradition in South Africa. And so how it expresses itself in that scene and in the Transkei was that, all propaganda takes things that you care about, things that are already there, and it kind of perverts them for its own intents. And
mm,
so if you read the lyrics of that song, it's basically a triumph song. It's basically saying, put your hands together. Look at us. We've triumphed. We are the Transkei. Look at the buildings. Look at all these things. All of our enemies have been defeated, and Satan is disappointed. Literally, there's a line that goes, "Usatan Dani," meaning this such Satan who was trying to stop us is disappointed. And so I feel like maybe it was one of many. I mean, when I asked my aunt what that song was, she says these were choral songs that they would sing. And
mm,
the choral music tradition is instrumental again to, Transkei culture. My father was a judge and my mother was a choral music conductor. And that's how they met. Because this is singing is a thing that it's a pastime that people do. So I think what was the most interesting thing about that was everywhere I've shown the film, nobody knows the song. And I too had to discover it by asking my aunt. And the scene when my other aunt walks in was pure verite. It was not planned. She was coming from Johannesburg and she just arrived and she heard this melody. And I was like, what? I didn't know she also knew the song. So everywhere I've shown the film, nobody knows the song. But when I went back to show the film in East London for the first time to take it back home, the cinema was full of people I'd grown up with, from school, from my family, extended family, family friends, etc. All these people who are from the Transkei. And the second they saw that scene and they heard the song, the whole cinema erupted and people sang the song live. And I was like, what? And it was again this thing where I've lived with these people my whole life and I had no idea. We don't talk about the Transkei. We don't talk about what happened, that it was there. It's just a place that people go to on the weekends, but the history of it is never really discussed. So to discover that the songs were so close to people, all you just need to is a melody, and then somebody reveals a whole history was incredible and very interesting to someone like me who's as a historian. I'm interested in, where does history live in the everyday? Is it really is it really gone? Is it really in the past if it can be invoked so easily?
I mean, that leads perfectly to the next question I was going to ask, which is what remnants there are of the trans sky that exist on the ground. Are there structures? Are there architectural buildings? Are there
Uh,
signposts and stuff? What's left of it?
there's a lot actually. I mean, the Transkei is still a place that people refer to that region as the Transkei. I
Oh,
do.
wow.
And people in South Africa still go, oh, but for white people, it was a holiday place because it's very beautiful. I mean, the wild coast is stunning. And so a lot of people had holiday homes there. There are small towns that are, beach villages and stuff. So people will say, oh, I'm going on holiday to the Transkei. And, you'll speak to any old white South African. Even in Utah, I met a white South African in Utah who told me that they used to go on holiday in the Transkei. And so
Wow.
it exists in some people's memories as like this destination. For many of us, it's home. Our village, our grandparents are still there, our uncles and aunts are still there. And so it's a place that you visit. It's now called the Eastern Cape because it was integrated into the rest of South Africa. But in memory, it still lives as, oh, yeah, Transkei. And then in terms of buildings, so the checkpoint that marked the border between South Africa and the rest and the Transkei, that was in a place called the Kai Cuttings, at the Kai River. And that building, we grew up it being a very scary building because it was the place where, as kids, we knew, okay, it's now time to play the game where we have to go into the boot because now we're crossing the border and not everybody in the car has a passport. So some of us
Wow.
have to go play the game and go hide in the boot, but the parents are not explaining us. They're not saying to us, here's this scary thing. It's gamified, or it becomes this thing of, oh, here comes the border. And then you're hiding, or there's going to be activity, and these pink people are going to come with guns and they're going to sniff around the car. They're going to come around and they're going to look around the car. And no one has told us that they're white. But we know that everything changes. There's silence, there's fear. Our parents they suddenly shrink around these people. And as a kid, you're like, okay, listen to your parents. You also are like, okay, but there isn't really something that's explained. That building is still there. And
Mm.
it is the way where it was the border. It's now a traffic stop. So it's now a place where if you get a traffic ticket, you have to go there at that border. And it's still called the Kai River. And then in terms of the actual, the towns in the Transkei, the buildings are still very much there, but now they've been renamed. But it's thick in the air. It's still there. And then I think, as somebody who now lives in the US and who's grown up and who's been thinking about this, and of course, the thing that we cannot get away from right now is Gaza and Israel and
Mm.
Palestine. And the Transkei is extremely relevant as a place to think about, actually, to maybe help us think about what's happening there, because nobody recognized this place in the world. The Transkei was not, it tried to be a country with flags and everything. It was not recognized by any country in the world except for two countries. And the
Mm.
two countries that recognized it were South Africa, which is the founder of the Transkei, and Israel. These were the
Mm.
only two countries in the entire world. And in fact, the Israelis came to the inauguration of the Transkei president. They were the only statespeople that came to celebrate this. There are factories and buildings that were built, that there was investment made.
Mm.
Why? Because the South African government and the Israeli government, same WhatsApp group. They were trying to do the same thing. So they were working together from the 1940s and 50s onwards. And so I remember growing up in my home with this photograph of my father in Israel. And we'd look through the album, and the only thing we were ever told about that picture was that, um, he touched Jesus's grave. That was the story that we ran with, and we told our friends, our father's been to Israel, he's touched Jesus's grave. Only to find out after the film, when I talked to my mother, She said, oh, yes, no, he and a group of other Transgaians would be sent to Israel routinely to go and get training. And in this case, he was selling certain products with a bunch of people, and they would go to Israel to go and either buy the product or sell the product. I don't know what, but there was a relationship between these two countries because the whole idea of apartheid is actually in my reading of it as somebody who's really looked at this thing very closely now to try to understand what was apartheid. Is it just that they hate us? Is it that? Like, what did we do? And if they hate us, where did it begin? Why do they hate us this much? Every single, like, everywhere you turn, this hatred, there's so much evidence that white people
Mm.
have for black people or brown people. Why do they hate us so much? This is where it began for me. But then I began to understand that apartheid, the project, the philosophy, the ideology, was about forced indigeneity. This idea of European settlers trying to force the idea that they come from somewhere where they know they don't come from.
Mm.
They know they don't come from the bottom of Africa. But apartheid is a project to make them feel that they did. And so it was the creation of a white homeland at the bottom of Africa, because Afrikaners had been, nearly decimated by the British in the South African War of 1899, and they were thought of as the trashy poor whites. The British were like these guys, they spat at them, and the concentration camps that they built to kill Afrikaners and other black people who fought in that war left such a scar in the Afrikaner identity, in the mindset and in the consciousness that was so painful that they thought we don't belong inside whiteness. And they were made to feel like that by the colonizers who were the British. And their revenge, their whole thing of let us lift ourselves up so that we too can feel like we are strong, was to invent apartheid as a way to
Wow.
say, let's create myths and stories and an origin story that say we came here in 1652 and here's our founder, and this is what a lot of people were told, right? This is what created that identity of like that Boer identity that came from being Boers into Afrikaner and nationalism. And that's why there's so many images of the film that speak to the aesthetics of nationalism,
Mm.
which is, the people sitting doing on the fields, all of that stuff that was copied from Europe. That was linear. If you watch any of Leni Riefenstahl's films, especially Olympiad or Triumph of the Will, this is what was happening in Germany, in France, in Sweden even, where you had people their bodies being kind of nationalized into this idea of nation. And so what you then get is an understanding of why they need to maintain what they need to do to maintain this nation.
Mm.
They need to create separation between, they need to build walls because they need to feel like somebody's hurt them, so now they need to find a place where they belong and no one's going to hurt them. And I feel like that's what's happening in Israel. Like, I mean, it's a very big subject, it's a very painful subject, but when I look at it, I think of the trans guy and how the trans guy is a byproduct of apartheid. And this idea that we must separate ourselves, and we also just want our own belonging and our own peace, and we just want to be left alone to our own devices. And so it's more of apartheid is less of a black problem. It's more of like the problem of white homelessness in Africa. And so what must they do to force this idea that they belong here and to maintain it? And you cannot maintain it without violence,
Mm.
which is what apartheid is, and which I think is what we're seeing in Israel, this idea of we want to expand actually this land so that we can also say, it's us, it belongs to us, and nobody can ever take that away from us.
I've never heard it articulated that way, that it's a problem of white homelessness. You
Yes.
know, um, one of my elders once said, all of man's problem stems from the inability to sit quietly in a room. And I think apartheid is that idea taken writ large and expanded across the world. And one of the earliest videos
Mm,
I've seen of the areas of Palestine with dark-skinned people who look closer to you and me, just walking around. And I can understand then replicating what was happening in South Africa, what happened to the Transkei across those lands. I've never heard it articulated
mm.
well. So
There's a
thank you.
primal wound. There's a
Mm.
primal wound that invents systems where people buy into this and this dehumanizing thing. You have to look at why are they doing this? Why? You know? And you go, oh, okay, we know what happened in the Holocaust. We know the ways in which Jewish people have been terribly, terribly treated by Europeans.
Yeah,
And instead of going back and saying, hey, Europe, you owe us this, they take it out on the weaker people,
yeah. They
which is
passed
what
the
happened in
blame
South Africa, right? It's like the Afrikaners are nursing this terrible wound that they got from the British. And instead of going directly back to the source, and now they're going to say, okay, how do we sacrifice the weaker people here that we can just take over with our guns? And in order to belong to this club of whiteness, which is
on.
what it's about. In order to belong to this club of whiteness, you have to do certain things to certain people, then you are a part of the gang. And it's like how in gangs actually, how you a new member of the gang is how you belong is you have to go commit a violent crime or steal
Yeah.
something. Then they go, "Oh, okay, now you can be part of the group." And so the way I see it is like and I have latitude in me to understand the shame and the guilt of living in a place that people don't recognize because the
Mm,
trans guy wasn't recognized and people would fight me in Joburg to be like, why you want to tell the story of a place that wasn't real? And I get why it wasn't politically real, but I'm like, but I grew up there. And so there's this complexity and also having to look at your memories and being like, damn, that was invalid. All the
mm,
joy that you felt, damn, somebody was being hurt actually for me to get that joy.
yeah.
So it's very painful to watch, not just because I'm a human being, which is why so many of us are hurt by this thing, but worse because I'm like, yo, this thing is now bringing up this other unknown history and this really strange relationship between the trans guy and that country, and
Mm.
how the Bantustan and the homeland idea they were shared, between these two states.
I can't imagine what it is for those who lived and survived the Trans-Sky to be watching this unfold in Israel right now, the ways in which they may be
Unspeakable.
re-traumatized. Yeah. And
It's
this takes me
unspeakable.
to one of the beautiful lines again from your film where you say, the residual dilemma is hurt. You
Hmm.
know, you talked about that. Um, my last question would be, what do you think? And this may be too big for you to answer. You've done us a service by making this film anyway. But the question is this: if the residual dilemma is hurt, what comes after? What do you think this film points toward? What is the gesture of it?
I've just written an essay in which I end the essay by saying, we are in a process, and what is this process about, and what is going to come out of it? And I think that as painful as, it is to witness, to be a witness of things like apartheid and colonialism, and to have lived through it, and for me in like a way that I did not experience the worst of it, um, we are the ones that are here to look at the wounds of the past because we're not necessarily experiencing them in the same ways as our
Mm,
parents and our grandparents. And so I think ours is to heal, actually. Ours is to figure out if people died for me to go to school and to be free and to be a filmmaker and to read and to fly across the world telling stories. People died for me to have that freedom. What
mm,
is my role? In 50 years' time, what are they going to be? What are the kids coming going to say about what we did for them? And I take my responsibility as a storyteller, uh, as a healer. I feel like so many of us who are the poets, are there to look at the wound, but not be consumed by it. Is to look at it and to insist on doing the thing that human beings do, which is to live and to create beautiful things and to take beautiful language and to demand the best of us, to insist on the best of us, to hold ourselves to the highest standard because where do we come from? Who gave birth to us? How did they survive? We're here because people did unspeakable things to ensure that we're here. And so I think when we were making this film, the thing we had written in the edit suite and in my study was that we are making our own medicine.
mm.
We are making our own medicine. We've identified the wounds. We cannot remain speaking about the wound. Otherwise, we will be consumed by it. And then we will recreate the wound if we aren't able to hold. The wounds will become the victims and the perpetrators again. which is what happens when you don't properly heal something. And so mine is to find others and to articulate this idea that we do have a responsibility to figure out what does it mean to heal. It's not the same for me as it is for you, as it is for my neighbor. But I know that my name is literally means be the love where there is none. And it's a very stressful name to have sometimes because I'm like, what does it mean to love when you open your phone today and you see what's online? What does that mean? And so, how do you then use cinema and music and poetry and any kind of creativity, which is a human inheritance? All of us have inherited creativity, every single one of us. So, what can you? My thing is like ours is to figure out the ingredients for the medicine because I want to have a family. I want other people to have families. I want we see small children. What world are we leaving for them? We can't only be exposing them to the horrors. It is also incumbent on us to figure out the beauty. And I think beauty, especially, is one of the most important universal tools that we can use. And that's beauty in language, beauty in music, beauty in the way we talk and think about each other. And so even like when you go online now and you see these films, even like so much violence, and it's
Mm.
like it's just adding to the wound. When you hear the songs are cool, we can like not jive. What am I like? Born in the 50s? What? You can dance and be, we can get down to the cool songs, but ultimately, if all the songs that we are hearing are just about guys,
Mm.
please,
Mm.
what else is there? What else
Yeah,
can we? And is that thing going to last 50 years? Is it going to last 100 years? And what kind of human beings are we creating to inherit that? And I've want to find the other healers and I want
yeah.
to get together with them and we have to beat that drum.
Mm.
Um, because it's also alive. And I think most people are actually good inside. I think most people can recognize love. Most people can recognize beauty and they will come to it when they see it.
Yeah.
And for me, that healing, sorry, I know I've been talking a lot, but like that thing is about not falling into the trap of the binary.
Mm.
Fascism and apartheid were like, put the lines and the borders between you. You're black, you're white, you're no, 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 guys. At some point, after we've looked and examined at our own blackness, we also have to love it enough to put it down and say, okay, can blackness widen itself up to become to engulf all of humanity, which I think it can and it does, but and to attach ourselves to that other thing of recovering a humanity that is being rapidly and aggressively lost everywhere you go, whether it's you're talking about the climate, you're talking about gender, you're talking about sexuality, all of it. So many things are out to destroy the very essence of life, including the planet. So what do we have to do to like, which corner are you and which project are you going to take up to go, yeah, I need to, maybe if I just stick to this, I will have lived a life that's worth it, I think. Not that, I mean, all life is valuable, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your answer has just raised more questions, but that is typical
Aish.
of your work, Millie. I'd love to keep talking to you about this, but we're out of time. I
Oh
want to
dear.
thank you for sharing your aunties and your culture and the spirit of Ubuntu with us, the audience.
Thank you.
To those in the cinema, please, there are screenings right across the UK. Please ask a friend to ask a friend to ask a friend to go and see the show. And please join me in thanking Millie for putting on this incredible, taking on this incredible endeavor and telling us this incredible story. Thank you.
Thank you so much with lots of love from South Africa and New York. And me and my team are just so grateful that everybody is like so, that people are watching. That's all we wanted is for people to watch. So thank you for receiving us. And thank you, Inua. And thanks to the Tape Collective. Mwah.